Hello, welcome to another episode of Purple Insider. Matthew Collar here. Joining me, special guest, former Green Bay Packer Mike Wahle. What a great name for a left guard, Mike Wahle. I mean, that's just, I feel like at some point, I hope this happened for you, that John Madden must have been saying, big old Mike Wahle is there at left guard blocking for Dorsey Levens. Did that happen at some point?
I don't know if Madden. So Aikman was kind of a bigger fan of me, I think, than Madden just because of eras. But I'll tell you one thing that is true. I screwed up. Is it Daniil Hunter? I said like Daniel or something yesterday, and people got furious at me. And I just started giggling because I remember when I was in Green Bay for 7 years. I started for 6 years. For six, so that's what 6 games a year plus, if you include preseason. So for 6 games a year for 6 years, I ran out of the tunnel and they mentioned my name and they would say, starting left guard, Mike Wahle, Wally, never Wall. And so I remember one time it made like the airwaves, and my uncles and everything called my dad and they're like, they still can't get it right. Like after he finally made it, so one of us finally made it and he still can't get it right. So I, it's tough, man.
Well, that's okay. I've been Collier for my entire life. So I always have to tell when I go on radio stations and stuff, it's like, it's what you put on your dog. And for you, it's like, no, Wall, not whale. So you're
It's
not
the yeah, it's the shave.
animal.
It's the shaving. It's the electric shaver. I need to drop the E. Half of the family dropped the E when they moved over off. When they got off the ship, they're like, "Let's drop the E. This is silly." Apparently, my side was the have-nots.
Yeah, we lost the I somewhere for Collier. But anyway, so you played for the Packers from 98 until 2004. Probably the best rookie of the 98 season. I don't remember anybody else who came in that year.
That was so. Yeah, it was Vonnie was first round pick that year. The only thing that you could say about the '98 season is that Randy Moss got drafted. I mean, like that's the only relevant thing in the NFC North. Like it certainly wasn't me. But I just remember Randy got drafted that year. Monday Night Football, he dropped 3 on us, and then of course the next year we spent our first 3 draft picks on cornerbacks,
Yeah,
and we didn't hit until the third one. The third one was the one that ended up shot down. Mike McKenzie ended up being the guy, but it was funny. Man, I just remember going, "Jesus, this kid Marshall's pretty good."
I'm glad that you picked up on where I was going with that.
Yeah.
So let me ask you a question about this. Do you resent Randy Moss to this day for demolishing the Green Bay Packers, or were you just so in awe as a football guy that you're like, hey, you got to respect it?
I don't know if I've ever resented anybody for being good at football. I'm a football fan like anybody else. I just think it's like no, there's so many. I got to play professional football, and I was pretty good for my time. I was pretty good, but there's so few people in the world that are that good at anything that when you get to see him, it's a treat, man. It's like I'm not buying a ticket because I'm playing against the guy, but it's like playing against John Randle. Like he was such a good player. You're kind of just like, man, it's amazing that you can be around guys that are that good at something.
Yeah, I did want to ask you about going up against Randall. Well, that's fair enough. I think there probably are some players that maybe still are annoyed with other guys who beat them like during their, maybe that's more of a fan thing. But when it comes to John Randall, I mean, to me, one of the most energetic, exciting players ever. But you and I were joking before we started recording about my size difference versus an NFL offensive lineman like yourself. I have been near John Randall. This man is not big. Like, I am not intimidated by his size. What was so hard to go up against him when he was a guy so undersized?
Well, he might be undersized from a height standpoint, but that's actually it's like Aaron Donald right now is under when Aaron Donald went to the Senior Bowl, I was there, and everybody almost like dismissed him on the first day because he looked like he was out of place, and then he just started tossing every offensive lineman this way and that to the point where they had to like take him out of drills. And John Randall was kind of the same thing, right? And he had leverage, he has ridiculous power and explosiveness, and because he was playing against like Randall McDaniel every day and getting his butt kicked for a couple of years, he was one of those guys that had not one, not two, not three, but multiple pass rush moves in sequence that he could just do over and over and over and just kind of go into the Rolodex every time. So you didn't know what you were going to get. And you match that with really high level intensity, love for the game, and just there's no fear in that guy at all. Like John Randall's one of those guys, and this happens with certain positions where it's almost like you see a striker in soccer. They don't care if they miss 10 times because they know if they get one goal, they're going to be a Hall of Famer. John Randall understood the math. He's like, if I make this, fight with Brett Favre a big deal and I get a sack a game, if I beat a guy 3 times a game, I'm going to get 1 knockdown, 1 sack. I'm going to be a Hall of Famer. Like he got that. So if he didn't win 1 or 2 times, he wasn't really beat up about it. Some guys get, kind of messed up about it in their head. That guy was nails all game long. He was tough to play against.
What was the trash talk like during those games with Randle?
So you got to remember, I was really young and he was kind of in his prime. So
Right,
he
right,
was
right.
the trash talk was probably one way. I just remember the first time I lined up against him, it was like the first third down of the game was in Lambeau, and he was a dude that would like read the media guide. And my nickname from college was Beagle after this All American at Navy. And so I just remember third down and 8, and like in the huddle, I'm in the huddle, and I sit there, and all of a sudden I start like Beagle, and I was like, oh shoot. And I turned around, I was like, yeah, I'll be there in a minute. Like try to act tough, and I went back in the huddle. I was like, oh shit. John Randle, 3rd and 8, he's coming to get me. They used to say, hey, John, before I got there, they used to say in Green Bay, like it was a joke, like, hey, we're throwing hot from free technique in Minnesota because like he's unblockable. The guy was unbelievable, man. He was really, really good.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And kind of I think one of the most unique stories really ever of a guy so undersized, undrafted, came from a really tough circumstance and then becomes not only that, but still hangs around and tweets about how he's playing golf in purple colors here in Minnesota. So a cool story for John Randle. I was going to ask you, because we'll get into this game and everything else, but just like, what is the best part of being on the field, whether it was the old Metrodome, which I'm sure was a privilege to play on that turf, but the games at Lambeau as well. I think that there's some more juice to this matchup than there is against the Bears, maybe because the Bears have not been relevant all that often, but these two teams for such a long time, it's like the Vikings kind of always have something there, and the Packers always have a Brett Favre or Aaron Rodgers that's going to make them relevant and great. What was it from a player standpoint that got you pumped to play the Vikings?
Well, first off, the old Metrodome was the hardest place in the league to play, hands down. They used to pump. I remember Mike Flanagan and I used to go out, before the game, 4 hours before the game, kind of screw around, throw some tobacco, and play catch and everything. And I remember one time we saw them setting up the speakers underneath the stands behind our bench, and we went over and we just tore all the wires out and everything. And it was actually quieter that game. But they pumped in. I mean, just imagine this: you're watching the film the next day, and the camera is so much motion. The camera's actually shaking. You got to like pause the camera and take a drink of water every once in a while. You're gonna get like seasick. And so that part of just playing in there with that intensity and what it does to the snap count, like anytime you're in that kind of environment, everything's heightened. Anxiety and everything is heightened. I think, at everybody on the sidelines and in the game. When we think about from a Packers standpoint, and guys don't want to hear this, but for us, Packers are, like Lambeau Field's the Yankee Stadium of the NFL. Packers are a storied franchise, and it was really, I kind of went through different phases in my time with Green Bay. But who was your main rival? Was it Minnesota, or was it Chicago? It was never Detroit, but it was Minnesota or Chicago. Minnesota just had those really, really good teams playing against that offensive system that had Dante and Chris Carter and Robert Smith, and that offensive line that had so many great players on it. Trying to keep up with those guys, and then from a personal standpoint, having to play against John Randle in particular and Chris Hovan a little bit later on, and that was a real tough matchup and just something I look forward to.
Yeah, as you went along there, the Vikings defenses got a little bit more porous at times and opened
You
up the
lose
door.
one guy like John Randle, though, and you just can't make up for him. I mean, you really cannot put. It would be like it would be like taking Aaron Donald off the Rams. They're not winning Super Bowls. I mean, it is what it is. Yeah, those are difference makers in on a level that most guys don't attain.
And it was a different time in the league where like now every owner is just a trillionaire or something. And at that time, Minnesota's ownership was a little spotty. And I don't think they wanted to necessarily pay everyone to fix the defense like current ownerships in the NFL do. I wonder what just being in the huddle with Favre in games like that is like, because it's so funny when we talk about Favre in Minnesota. It's, with a lot of reverence in the same way it is for Green Bay. It's like the one thing we can agree on. We can agree that Wisconsin has better cheese. No one's debating that. And we can agree that Favre was really, truly something amazing. What was it like for you to be in the huddle with him?
Well, I think, from in NFL franchises, where you get drafted matters. And, your career can largely be defined by, you get drafted by, there's a lot of bad franchises in the NFL. If you get drafted by a bad one and you're not just super elite, like you might not make it. And one thing about being with Brett, or I'm sure being with Aaron now, is that you step into the huddle every time feeling like you got a chance. And I don't know how many. I'd be honest with you, I don't know how many players actually feel that way in the NFL right now, given kind of the quality of quarterback. I don't know where that stops as far as is it 15 or 20, where you just feel like, I don't know if I have a chance today. Every time we stepped in the huddle, we thought we could score a touchdown. And, that kind of confidence and understanding what that means and the confidence the way you carry yourself, that really is an amazing feeling. And he's the kind of guy that just is, elite level competitor, elite level confidence, but also just a guy that makes you feel at ease with yourself and being comfortable in his own skin allows you to be comfortable in your own skin.
I used to, as a kid, watch all of the here's the NFL films mic'd up and stuff like that. And it was
Those are the
always
best.
always the best. And it was always so interesting to me. And of course, Favre slow motion highlights and stuff, throws that don't make any sense, but somehow get completed, interceptions that didn't make any sense either. But with Favre, the inside the huddle stuff was always so interesting because it seemed like this is the last guy who panics, right? Like he's just hyping everybody up and, slapping everybody on the rear end and everything. And just I can picture being on his team must be like, oh, this guy believes we're going to win today every single Sunday.
Brett, I'll tell you the story that kind of sums up Brett. So we're playing Detroit, and Alonzo Spellman, who played for a number of different teams in the NFC North, but he was wrapping up his career with, I believe it was the end of his career in Detroit. He's like third string. His knees are bad at this point, but he's a scary human being. If you don't know who I'm talking about, go ahead and Google.
Oh, I know. Spellman. Yeah.
Right. He's frightening, right? And we're going down on a screenplay at the end of the fourth quarter. We're blowing them out. It's raining outside. And he's going against Martausch for the right tackle. We throw a screen to him on. We're all kind of making our blocks and running downfield, chasing him. And Brett comes out of nowhere and runs downfield and cuts Alonzo Spellman at the knees. And we're all kind of like, oh, haha, wait a second. And Alonzo Spellman gets up, and we think at this point he's going to take his helmet off and start beating with it. He's angry. Now he's just went from 2000 Alonzo Spellman to 1995 Alonzo Spellman, right? And I just remember Brett gets back to the huddle, he's giggling and everything, and I just remember Tausch looks over and goes, "Thanks a lot, man. Real nice." And that's kind of like quarterbacks in general, but that was Brett to a T. Hey man, I'll go. You guys take care of this, but I'm going to get people riled up right now. He has no fear in him whatsoever.
When he went to the Vikings, how did you feel about that?
Happy for him. Yeah, super happy for him. I think he wanted to go there originally before he went to, he went to the Jets. Listen, Marco, a couple other really, really good players, myself, left after the 2004 season. I know Brett wasn't happy about it. He felt maybe, and then they drafted Aaron, I think the year after that, and he thought maybe, okay, this is time. And, when it's time to move on, sometimes the way it's handled doesn't look great, maybe in the media or whoever's take you have, but when a guy's given that much to a team and he wants an opportunity to go win a Super Bowl somewhere else, man, it's give him the chance to do it. So the fact that he finally got there, unfortunately, you guys had that. He kind of had that bumble against the Saints. I don't know, was it 4th and 8 or something like that? But it was obviously a really kind of a magical season, that one season for him. He played with some great players up there, and I know that you guys as fans of his now respect that everything kind of he brought to Green Bay. And then you got to bring to Minnesota, and you saw what kind of magic he's got in that arm of his.
Yeah, it was, there was a too many men in the huddle penalty that moved him back.
That's
Otherwise,
right.
They would have been able to just run and then kick a field goal. It's a whole thing. But with Favre, what was crazy about that season was when he got here, I think everyone sort of thought well, maybe he can game manage and make a throw here or there. Then they play San Francisco. He makes the greatest throw. You could argue the greatest throw in NFL history. I mean, just
it was a
degree of difficulty. And then it was just on from there. And then he's setting own personal records and everything else. You're this is what legends do. I was watching Serena the other day, and she's battling and she's beating people at her age. You're legends do things that don't make sense. And everybody for a single year got to see that with Favre. And it's just one of those unforgettable Minnesota sports moments.
Yeah, I think it was fun for everybody. I mean, if you're a fan of football, it's hard not to, sit back and enjoy that season, enjoy everything he was able to do. I was watching the same thing with Serena, and kind of the same thoughts are going through my head as what we were talking about earlier. There's just certain people that are so good and so much better than everybody else at what they do that it's hard not to just be in awe and enjoy the ride.
Man, but I have to say that you have the most, as for somebody that played in this rivalry, and it's so intense, a very calm attitude about it, very zen about this rivalry. The fans are not that way.
I think the rivalry. Well, I found out today on Twitter that the Minnesota fans are much more. I want to say this respectfully, but Packers. First of all, players don't think about rivalries like fans do.
Mhm.
But even from a fan standpoint, I think because they've been, especially recently, they've enjoyed so much success with Aaron Rodgers at the helm. When you start talking rivalry, we're starting talking all the games we're losing to San Francisco in the playoffs. We're not necessarily talking about Minnesota. So these are important games because they're division games, and certainly I think there's a narrative here with Zadarius Smith coming to the other team and everything that's gone on there. But the passion, I think, is usually on the side of the team trying to get to the top, not the team on the top.
No, I mean, that's absolutely true. The little brother syndrome of Minnesota with Green Bay is 1,000% there for the entire history, really, of the two franchises. Even, you go way back and Bart Starr gets championships and the Vikings lose in their Super Bowls. And then on through the Favre era and everything else. They have owned the Minnesota Vikings for the most part. But I wonder how you feel about this game in particular. Zadarius Smith is such a huge factor. And hey, we got trenches action, my friend. I mean, this is big. This is like Bakhtiari coming back and Jenkins coming back. The Vikings have been drafting linemen for years to try to stop Kenny Clark. Nobody can do it. I love the way that this matchup kind of plays out, even a little bit old school football.
Well, the thing I like about both teams, but if we're just going to talk about Minnesota right now, is I think on offense and defense, they really have talent at all three levels because they brought in Zadarius, they have Hunter, they have Kendricks, obviously at linebacker position. They have Patrick Peterson and Harrison Smith on the back end. So you've got talent everywhere. And so when we look at the offensive line of Green Bay, is Bakhtiari going to be there? Is Jenkins going to be there? Listen, Adam Stenavich, who's now the offensive coordinator, did this masterful job of making lemonade out of lemons last year with a makeshift offensive line when everybody started going down to injury. And they did an incredible job. Part of it's obviously a huge part of it's Aaron. Part of it's play calling. Devontae was a big deal. I mean, all of those things, but you have to really give credit to Adam Stenavich and the job he did with that line in particular. And I think now we're hoping that Bakhtiari and Jenkins are back, okay? And I'm just going to be, as transparent as possible. I don't think many people, if Bakhtiari comes back, I'm assuming he's healthy, I don't think many people beat him. So he's kind of a guy that erases. I don't care who you put over there. He's going to erase that player. Jenkins is turning into that guy. You kind of don't know what you're going to get because he hasn't played right tackle. He's been able to play everything, but he hasn't played right tackle before at length, and he's coming off an injury. Z Smith, is going to make a play in this game. He's going to make a play. The question is it going to be enough? Because when I look at the game and the comment I made earlier in our show, you look at the interior defensive line as kind of the way that you're going to defeat Green Bay, in my mind, because that's where our younger players are. Our right guard is going to be our most inexperienced player, most likely, whether it's Jensen or maybe Royce Newman's coming back, depending on whether Jenkins plays or not. Do you have interior pass rushers that are going to be able to create havoc for Aaron? Because otherwise, it's really not that hard to game plan around like a Z Smith if he's going to play in one spot. And that forces now you to bring pressure. If they bring pressure against Aaron Rodgers, that usually spells disaster for the defense. So I don't know if you have the interior pass rush to kind of disrupt the pocket without pressure. And if that's the case, I feel really confident that we can at least put up some points. Obviously, on the other side, I don't know if there's another group of skill position players, not named Kirk Cousins, but all receivers, running backs, as talented as the Minnesota guys. And so I love our defense. I think we're a top 3 defense this year. But I think Minnesota is really, really good from a skill position standpoint, and it's going to be fun to watch.
Isn't it funny that the Vikings have always had the receivers and the Packers have always had the quarterback? Like, no matter what year you're talking about, it could be 1992, and it was like Chris Carter and Jake Reed and everybody. It's so funny about how some things kind of never change with that. But listen, it's not like you had Randle. You had Dante Culpepper. I mean, these guys were really, really good. Yes.
You guys had Warren Moon. I mean, these guys were really, really good, right?
It's brief, though. It just didn't last.
It is, yeah. You're absolutely. Listen, we're the only franchise that's enjoying 30+ years of like Hall of Fame levels. I mean, this has been like, it's like every day's Christmas when you're a Green Bay Packers fan because you get the best quarterbacks in the league every time you wake up in the morning.
Yeah, well, someday that'll end.
Yeah.
Someday. I don't know when. When you see, I'm sure Vikings fans, when they saw reports of Jordan Love looking good in camp, they're like, no, come on, not this. But yeah, it is sort of fascinating how that's always existed. And Zadarius Smith, though, I wonder what you think from a lineman perspective.
Mhm.
He moves around a lot, and just in training camp, like not surprising to you, I'm sure, but lining up over the A gap, lining up at linebacker, sometimes even middle linebacker to rush. He's so unique in that way. Like, what does that do to the interior of an offensive line, especially when you have the crowd noise that's being created by US Bank Stadium?
Yeah, it destroys them. I think he's actually more dangerous inside than outside. I think he's a great. First of all, Zadarius Smith was my favorite player when he got there. I think that the culture change that happened when the LaFleur regime came in was like 85% Zadarius Smith. Honestly, I mean, I think he was that influential in the locker room, and he's one of those guys that I think he's glue. I think he's absolutely amazing. I don't really understand everything that's gone on, and I know he's upset right now about Green Bay. I don't understand the story, but I know he was amazing and how much everybody respected him in the building when he was there. He's a very very unique talent. We were talking earlier. He's like, he reminds me of Julius Peppers, a guy I played with in Carolina. When you bring a guy inside like that, and this all started with that NASCAR package in the Super Bowl with Justin Tuck and the Giants went against the Patriots. I think Justin had 2 or 3 sacks in that game, and they basically destroyed the offensive line of the New England Patriots. Zadarius Smith, when he lines up at a guard over a guard where he's in a 2-point, where he lines up in the center in the A gaps in a 2-point, guys like me, back at 295, 300 pounds, cannot move laterally with Zadarius Smith. We're just not athletic enough. And so he can really get on edges. He can create havoc. He can do a stutter bull, and he can run games with the best of them. So you line him up on the same side as Hunter, maybe, and you just let them run ETs and TEs, and you are not going to be able to pass them off. Maybe you get 3 out of 5, maybe you get 4 out of 7, but the times they get through, man, he's going to get hit on the quarterback, or he's going to at least pressure the quarterback. And I think if I was a defensive coordinator, defensive line coach for Minnesota, I would start almost like the old Reggie White, like, let's just start moving them around the line and see who's scared.
Yes. And in previous years, the Vikings had some guys on the interior who were all sorts of scared of Zadarius Smith. And my first thought when they signed him was like, those are the guys celebrating today.
Yeah.
That he's not going up against them. And I like just watching him operate on a daily basis of training camp. Like, even though an energetic guy, also very serious about his job, but there are just dudes who you feel the earth shake when they're moving because of their power. And you're like, man, he could play defensive tackle if he needed to. Like, there are just not the old school defensive ends were bigger. They were like 275, 280. Now they're like 240, 250. He's like an old school defensive end with that size of his. It's really remarkable to see.
Yeah, he's like old school, maybe from like a height and weight, but the way that weight is put on that frame is very, very unique. Again, I think the only closest thing I can think of is Julius Peppers, who is maybe the all-time freak that I've ever been around athletically. So the guy's super special. But listen, I'm not going to lie to you. The guy on the other side of the ball, Rashawn Gary, our guy, he's pretty good. He's going to be a guy that I guarantee they're game planning against him, because who's that? Brian O'Neill, that right tackle.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, if they leave him one-on-one with Rashawn Gary, it's going to be a long day for that kid.
Yeah. And O'Neill just got a huge contract and has developed into a really nice player. And that's where some of these battles are going to be great. I mean, you have O'Neill. Christian Darrisaw was a first-round pick at left tackle, but still on the interior, a rookie right guard playing in this game for the first time. And what in your view makes Kenny Clark so special? Because in my less educated view, it's that he picks dudes up and throws them into the quarterback. I mean, there's just so few people who have that explosion and strength combination. And then he's got to weigh like 325. He is an absolute monster. I think if there's one dude who could ruin the game for the Packers against the Vikings, it's him.
Well, he certainly did a lot of that last year. And when you look at Kenny, I think the thing that's fun to watch about him is you kind of see the end result, but he's a technician. And when I say that, I mean the way that his foot strike and his hand placement and the way he learns the snap count and all. Like, if you did a film session with him and you kind of, what are you thinking about? What do you see? And how are you able to jump the snap so often? What would come out of his brain, I think, would blow you away. He's a very, very intelligent player, and he just knows how to get to the chest of offensive linemen before they can get that second step in the ground. If you can do that, you can do that well. You can be very disruptive in this league. And he's essentially created a pass rush out of not having a lot of moves. He's just kind of, he does a really good job of getting into you off balance, and he's so quick at flipping his hips. He's turned that into a pretty viable pass rush. The first couple of years in the league, you wouldn't say that he was very effective in that that side of the equation, but right now, I just don't think there's anything he can't do.
Yeah, he is the guy that gives Vikings offensive players and fans nightmares, because with Kirk Cousins, he's not mobile. He's not going to run away from anybody. And we've seen Kenny Clark and previously Zadarius Smith really just crush game plans basically on their own in the past. I think that still remains one of the biggest concerns. So let me ask you one more thing about this game, which is just the question you've probably been asked by a lot of people: the receivers for the Packers. Is it an overrated storyline that Davante Adams is gone, or is it like, look, that was his guy and it's going to take an adjustment? How do you view that?
Let's give the respect that Davante deserves. He's the best receiver in the league. So I'm not going to say it's an overrated story, in that anytime you lose the best guy in the league, it's a big deal. But Aaron Rodgers has made the careers there's a lot of bank accounts that have extra zeros in them because of Aaron Rodgers, right? And he's done this with Greg Jennings, Jordy Nelson, Davante Adams. All of these guys are a consequence of their own work ethic, but also playing with the best quarterback in the league. And I think having the weapons that he has, we don't know what Sammy Watkins is going to look like. He was first, what was he, fourth or fifth draft pick in the draft, I think, back in the day. Talent's there, just injuries. Randle Cobb's his guy. Alan Lazard's a guy that he's a Swiss Army knife for this team last year. And we're all kind of hoping he can be the guy because of everything he brings to the table, not only receiving, but also in the run game. And then you have these rookies that we don't know what Watson's going to be like. He was injured for most of camp, but he's a burner. And then Dobbs just ended up having a really good camp. You add to that, we have our two running backs, Mercedes Lewis, Robert Tonyan might come back at the tight end position. I want to mention AJ and Aaron Jones because I think they're both Pro Bowl caliber running backs. I don't know if they're Dalvin Cook, but they're pretty close as far as effectiveness. But you look at all the weapons we have, and then you look at the guy throwing the ball, and he's a force multiplier. He makes everybody better. So I don't think anybody inside of the building is really concerned that Aaron's not going to get his yards and be effective. I think that's just a story that was fun to talk about in the media.
Yeah, I think that with him and Patrick Mahomes losing Tyreek Hill, it's like I'll underestimate those guys when they're like, wearing gold jackets or something, when they're not in the league anymore. Until then, I'm going to assume that they're going to be great because that's what their track record says. So last question for you. I want to know who the most underrated Packer you played with was during the day or during your day, like who nobody gave credit to. Everyone knew Favre. Who is the most underrated Packer? Other than Mike Wahle, of course.
Yeah, I was going to say easy question. But so I'm going to say this. It was probably Mike Flanagan.
Yeah, great player.
Yeah, it was Mike Flanagan I'm saying that because Mike Flanagan should be a Packers Hall of Fame guy right now. And you tell me why he's not. I can't figure it out. He was, he had that horrific leg injury. I think the first or second play of his career in a preseason. But he had the best hands of anybody I ever played with, and I played with some amazing linemen. And he was the smartest guy that I've ever been around in a football locker room. And just a complete effective run, pass, anything you want, screen game, get downhill, and an amazing teammate. I mean, just so much goes into it. And you're usually an unsung hero, especially back in the NFC North when you had Matt Burke there, Olin Kreutz is there already, and they kind of like had already established themselves. So that the path to get into the Pro Bowls and the All Pros was a little murky, to be fair, because of the NFC North talent. But God, I thought he was, I still think he was one of the best guys I've played with.
Well, we're big fans of fullbacks on the show. William Henderson, what a great one, coming out of the backfield, an underappreciated Packer.
William was a good, Will was a good player. We call him Boogie. He's a character. He was a character. I mean, that's the thing about football you miss is those locker room guys, man. They're characters. He was certainly one of them.
I just missed the size of his pads. They're like up to his.
Yeah, I'll be honest with you. I like throwing on the program every once in a while just to see the neck rolls. Like I miss all that. And it's funny. Here's some I don't know if people talk about, but when you get to the league, At least this is back in the late 90s. But when you get to the league, it's like you can't wear that. Like if you wore a neck roll, it was like, well,
Right.
what's wrong with you?
Right.
You know, it was like your
Oh,
neck.
right.
Your neck needs to get bigger. It's like it was in high school. It was a sign of like being cool, but when you
Right.
got to the pros, it was like, nah, it's not very cool, man.
Yeah, there was a time where it just sort of petered out. I guess
Yeah.
that might be why. But I asked the Vikings fullback CJ Ham, like, why don't you wear that? And he's like, that's corny. That's old school.
Yeah.
I'm like, come
Yeah.
on, man. Looks cool. Anyway, well, you're doing podcasts for the Believe Sports Network. I don't know how many Vikings fans will be jumping over to listen to Packers pods,
Probably all of them.
Yeah, I was gonna say, but if they're going to, they should check that out. So I really appreciate your time. Fun to reminisce about the old games and get a hardcore offensive lineman's view of this game. So really great to get to know you, and hopefully we'll do it again soon, man.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.